Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. The Shadow in the Rear View. The desert stretched out for miles, an endless expanse of black velvet stitched with silver moonlight. The air was dry, the kind that made your throat itch and your skin feel like paper. Ethan gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up Ford Explorer, the hum of the engine the only sound aside from his friend's laughter. They'd just left the festival, a chaotic mix of drumming, chanting, and glowing fires that felt older than time itself. Ethan had enjoyed it, but was eager to get back home. Something about the desert at night unnerved him. "You're too serious, man," Nick said from the passenger seat, tossing an empty soda can into the back. "Lighten up. That festival was awesome." "Yeah, Ethan. You looked like you were waiting for the ground to swallow you whole," Sarah chimed in, leaning forward from the back seat. Her dark hair caught the moonlight, making her look almost ghostly. "It's not that," Ethan muttered. "I just don't like driving out here at night. It's weird." "Weird?" Nick grinned. "Oh no, the desert boogeymen are gonna get us." He waved his hands dramatically, earning a laugh from Sarah and Liam, who sat next to her. Ethan didn't laugh. The legends of the Navajo Nation weren't just campfire stories. His grandmother used to tell him about the Skinwalkers, witches who could take the form of animals to stalk and torment their prey. He'd always laughed it off as a kid, but now, driving through the empty desert with only the moon and stars to guide him, those stories didn't seem so funny. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see Sarah and Liam's dimly lit faces. Instead, he saw a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at him. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. The eyes didn't blink back. They hovered just behind the car, almost floating in the darkness. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered, his grip tightening on the wheel. "What?" Sarah asked, noticing his sudden tension. Ethan didn't answer. He glanced again. The eyes were still there, bobbing slightly as though they were attached to something. No, someone running alongside the car. He pressed the gas, the engine growling as the car picked up speed. "What's wrong, dude?" Nick asked, his voice suddenly serious. "There's something back there," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "In the mirror." Nick twisted in his seat to look out the rear window. "I don't see anything." "It's there," Ethan insisted. But when he looked again, the eyes were gone. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Sarah let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, now you're just scaring me. I'm serious," Ethan said, his tone sharp. "I saw something. Maybe it was an animal," Liam offered. "Coyotes or something." Ethan nodded, though the explanation didn't feel right. The eyes had been too high off the ground, too steady. He tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. But his unease only grew as the laughter in the car died down. The desert seemed to press in on them, the shadows growing deeper, darker. And then Sarah screamed. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat as he jerked his eyes back to the rearview mirror. This time, the yellow eyes weren't outside the car. They were inside, a hunched figure crouched in the shadows of the back seat, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its face was a grotesque blend of human and canine, with matted fur and a mouth stretched into an impossible grin. "Oh my God!" Sarah cried, scrambling away from the thing. Liam froze, his eyes wide with terror. Ethan slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the gravel road. The creature let out a guttural growl before vanishing into thin air. The silence that followed was deafening. What the hell was that? Nick yelled, twisting in his seat. What did you do? I didn't do anything. Ethan shouted back, his voice shaking. He threw open the door and stumbled out, his legs feeling like jelly. The others followed, their breaths coming in panicked gasps. The moonlight revealed deep claw marks gouged into the roof of the car, as though some massive animal had raked its claws across it. Sarah pointed at the windshield, her hand trembling. Strange symbols, smeared in a dark, sticky substance, covered the glass. What is that? Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. We need to go, Ethan said, his voice firm. No. No one argued. They piled back into the car, the air inside thick with fear. Ethan drove as fast as he dared, his eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. But the yellow eyes didn't return. When they reached town the next morning, they inspected the car in the daylight. The claw marks were even deeper than they'd thought, the metal twisted and scarred. The windshield was smeared with what looked like dried blood, the symbols now faded but still visible. Ethan's stomach turned as he realized he recognized one of the symbols. It was something his grandmother had drawn once, years ago, when she told him stories of skinwalkers. It's a warning, she'd said, her voice grave. If you see it, you run. You don't look back. No one spoke about what had happened that night. Not to each other, not to anyone else. But Ethan couldn't forget the yellow eyes in the rearview mirror, or the twisted grin of the creature in his back seat. He knew they had been marked, warned to stay away from the desert. And he knew, deep down, that they had barely escaped with their lives. Story 2. The howling outside the tent. The Arizona wilderness was a silent, sprawling canvas of red rock and endless skies. Julia and her boyfriend, Ryan, had ventured deep into the backcountry, eager to escape the mundane rhythm of their city lives. It was their first camping trip together, an adventure they hoped would strengthen their bond and give them stories to tell for years to come. They had chosen a secluded spot near a dry riverbed, miles from the nearest trailhead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Julia and Ryan sat by their modest campfire, the warmth of the flames battling the encroaching chill of the desert night. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like shards of broken glass. They joked and shared stories, the crackling of the fire punctuating their laughter. Then, just as the last embers began to fade, they heard it, a long, mournful howl that echoed through the stillness. It was distant but unmistakably strange, neither fully animal nor entirely human. Julia glanced at Ryan, her brow furrowed. Coyotes, she offered, her voice uncertain. Probably, Ryan replied, though his tone lacked conviction. He tossed another log onto the fire, the flames surging back to life. Nothing to worry about. We're out in their territory, that's all. Julia nodded, though the sound lingered in her mind. They retired to their tent shortly after, zipping themselves inside and settling into their sleeping bags. The desert grew quieter still, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the sagebrush. Julia woke suddenly, her heart racing. The pitch blackness inside the tent was disorienting, and for a moment, she didn't know what had startled her. Then she heard it, a voice, faint but clear, calling her name. Julia. Her breath caught in her throat. It sounded like Ryan, but not quite. There was something off about the cadence, the way the syllables dragged unnaturally. She turned her head, her eyes adjusting to the dim glow of their lantern. Ryan was beside her, his chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of sleep. Panic prickled at her skin. She shook his shoulder roughly. "Ryan, wake up," she whispered urgently. He groaned, opening his eyes groggily. "What? What's wrong?" "I heard something," Julia said. It sounded like you, but you were asleep." Ryan frowned, rubbing his face. Before he could respond, the howling began again, louder this time. It wasn't a singular sound, but a chorus of overlapping cries, circling their campsite like a macabre symphony. The hairs on Julia's arm stood on end. "That doesn't sound like coyotes," Ryan muttered, his voice tight. The howls grew closer, more frantic. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the gravel outside their tent. Julia clutched Ryan's arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ryan grabbed the flashlight from his pack, his jaw set. "Stay behind me." The zipper of the tent began to slide down slowly, the metallic rasp impossibly loud in the still night. Julia's breath hitched as a shadow loomed just outside. Ryan flicked on the flashlight, aiming the beam toward the opening. What they saw defied explanation. Standing upright was a figure that might have once been human, but now it was something else entirely. Its skin was covered in matted fur, patches of raw flesh visible beneath. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, like twin orbs of molten gold. The creature's face was elongated, its mouth stretching into a twisted grin that revealed jagged, blood-stained teeth. It let out a guttural growl, a sound so deep and resonant it seemed to vibrate the ground beneath them. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible, the creature darted away, disappearing into the trees with a blur of motion. Julia and Ryan stared at each other, their faces pale and their hearts pounding. "We need to leave now," Ryan said, his voice shaking. They scrambled to pack their gear, their hands trembling as they stuffed sleeping bags and supplies into their backpacks. The howling continued, now interspersed with guttural snarls and the sound of branches snapping in the distance. By the time they reached their car, the first rays of dawn were creeping over the horizon. They drove in silence, the events of the night replaying in their minds. It wasn't until they stopped at a gas station hours later that Julia noticed the claw marks on their tent, deep and deliberate. Julia and Ryan never spoke of the trip again, but the memory stayed with them. On quiet nights, when the wind howled outside her window, Julia would think of the creature, its glowing eyes and guttural growl, and wonder what might have happened if they hadn't woken up in time. The desert, she realized, held secrets far older and darker than she had ever imagined. Story 3. The Stranger on the Desert Trail. Derek had always loved the solitude of hiking. The wind sweeping through the canyons, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots, and the vast emptiness of the Utah desert were his therapy. It was the perfect way to disconnect from the noise of the world, or so he thought. That particular morning, the sky was a dull gray, the kind that hinted at rain but rarely delivered in the arid desert. Derek had started early, eager to tackle a lesser-known trail that locals referred to as the Whispering Path. He'd read about it in an obscure hiking forum, where seasoned adventurers exchanged tales of breathtaking vistas and eerie stories. Derek had brushed off the latter. Ghost stories were for campfire nights, not daylight hikes. He had been walking for hours when he first saw the man. The figure sat on a rock by the trail, hunched over as if he were studying the dirt at his feet. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his wiry frame like they belonged to someone else. A wide-brimmed hat obscured most of his face, but Derek could see a jawline streaked with grime. As Derek approached, he felt the first tendrils of unease curl in his stomach. "Hey there," Derek called out, trying to keep his voice light. "Nice day for a hiker?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. Then he muttered something low and guttural in a language Derek didn't recognize. It wasn't Spanish or Navajo or anything he'd heard before. The words were sharp, almost wet, like they were being forced through a throat not meant for speech. Derek's steps faltered. The urge to engage in polite conversation evaporated, replaced by an instinctive need to move. He gave a tight nod, muttered something about getting back on the trail, and quickened his pace. As he walked, the wind seemed to pick up, carrying with it a faint whispering that Derek tried to ignore. He didn't look back, but 10 minutes later, his heart nearly stopped. The man was ahead of him, the exact same man, sitting in the exact same position, perched on another rock as if he had never moved. Derek froze, his mind racing. It wasn't possible. He hadn't seen the man pass him, and there were no shortcuts on this part of the trail. Yet there he was, the same filthy clothes, the same wide-brimmed hat. This time, Derek didn't bother with pleasantries. He walked past quickly, keeping his eyes on the trail, and his hand near the pocket knife clipped to his belt. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself. "It's just a coincidence." By the time the sun began to set, Derek had covered more miles than he intended. His legs ached, and his throat was dry. He found a flat patch of ground near a cluster of boulders and decided to set up camp. As he pitched his tent, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The silence of the desert, usually so comforting, now felt oppressive. Every rustle of wind sounded like a footstep, every shadow like a crouching figure. He forced himself to eat a protein bar and drink some water before crawling into his tent. The thin fabric felt like a flimsy barrier against the encroaching darkness. He lay there for hours, eyes wide open, ears straining for sounds that weren't there. Then it came, a scream. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. It was a high-pitched, guttural wail that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. Derek's blood turned to ice. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The man was there, only it wasn't a man anymore. The figure crawled on all fours, its limbs bending in ways that defied anatomy. Its head jerked unnaturally with each movement, and its eyes glowed faintly in the beam of Derek's flashlight. The tattered clothes hung off its skeletal frame, flapping like dead skin in the breeze. Derek couldn't move. He couldn't even scream. The creature let out another piercing wail, its jaw opening impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It began to crawl faster, its movements erratic and horrifyingly animalistic. That broke him. Derek bolted from the tent, leaving everything behind. His boots pounded against the dirt as he sprinted down the trail, not daring to look back. The scream followed him, growing fainter as he put distance between himself and the campsite. He didn't stop running until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. When he finally stumbled into a small town miles away, he collapsed at the doorstep of a gas station. The clerk called the sheriff, who listened patiently as Derek babbled about the creature on the trail. The sheriff, an older man with weary eyes, nodded grimly. "You were on the Whispering Path, weren't you?" the sheriff asked. Derek nodded. "Locals don't go there," the sheriff said. "Not anymore. They say it's Skinwalker territory. Best thing you can do is burn some sage and never go back." Derek didn't need to be told twice. He never hiked alone again. But even now, years later, he can't close his eyes without seeing the creature's twisted form crawling toward him. And in the dead of night, when the wind howls just right, he swears he can still hear it scream.